you know, my family, or the sovereign, and we as a family don't own this place. It doesn't belong, and it's not as if we're making money out of it.
Behind palace walls, a decision shook the crown itself. King Charles' abdication whispers, Queen Camilla scandal rumors, and Buckingham Palace drama collide in one explosive moment. What looked like ceremony was betrayal, conspiracy, and power, shifting forever inside the British monarchy in modern royal history. The words landed like a thunderclap inside Buckingham Palace, echoing off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of loyalty, silence, and sacrifice. This was not supposed to be a dramatic day. It was meant to be controlled, measured, almost routine. Instead, it became the spark that ignited the most devastating royal family betrayal in generations. As officials gathered and cameras rolled, the atmosphere grew heavy, thick with unspoken tension and fear. Everyone sensed something was wrong long before a single word was spoken. King Charles stood beneath the weight of portraits that seemed to judge him from another age. His posture was composed, yet strained, the stillness of a man standing at the edge of a life-altering choice. Years of duty, patience, and restraint had led to this moment, and now there was no turning back. When the announcement came, it did not arrive with anger or drama. It came cold, deliberate, and final. Abdication, a word that instantly sent shockwaves through the British monarchy and beyond. Across the room, reactions flickered like lightning. Some froze in disbelief. Others instinctively lowered their eyes, aware they were witnessing history fracture in real time. Queen Camilla remained outwardly composed, but the shift in energy was unmistakable. The carefully maintained balance of the palace had tilted. What followed was not applause or reassurance, but silence. The kind of silence that signals the end of one era and the violent birth of another. Behind that announcement lay a deeper story, one rooted in palace intrigue and whispered accusations. For weeks, quiet rumors had circulated through royal corridors. Conversations stopped abruptly when certain names were mentioned. Doors closed more often. Trust, once assumed, became fragile. The Buckingham Palace drama unfolding was not fueled by tabloids alone, but by internal fractures that could no longer be hidden. At the heart of it all was a royal conspiracy few outside the inner circle could fully grasp. Prince William watched everything unfold with controlled intensity. His expression betrayed nothing, yet the weight of an approaching monarchy pressed heavily on his shoulders. This was not the transition he had prepared for, nor the timing anyone expected. Still, the shift was undeniable. The future of the crown was accelerating, and with it came questions about loyalty, legacy, and who truly held power within the royal family. Catherine, Princess of Wales, remained steady beside him, her presence calm but resolute. She understood the gravity of what was happening far beyond the cameras. This was not simply British monarchy news breaking across screens worldwide. It was a reckoning. One shaped by private decisions, hidden communications, and a growing belief that betrayal had been allowed to fester at the heart of the institution. As the announcement concluded, the palace did not erupt into chaos. Instead, it absorbed the shock quietly, almost reverently. But outside those walls, the world was already reacting. Headlines formed within seconds. Speculation exploded. Analysts debated motives while the public demanded answers. Why now? Why so suddenly? And why did this feel less like retirement and more like a strategic retreat? One truth became clear almost immediately. This was not just about King Charles' abdication. It was about trust shattered, authority challenged, and a monarchy forced to confront its own vulnerabilities. The Queen Camilla scandal, once whispered, now loomed over every discussion. And as the dust began to settle, one question echoed louder than all others. If this was only the beginning, how deep did the betrayal really go? The shockwaves from the announcement had barely settled when the palace began to change its rhythm. Buckingham Palace, once defined by rigid routine and predictable ceremony, slipped into a tense, watchful silence. Staff moved carefully, conversations dropped to whispers, and every glance felt loaded with suspicion. This was no longer just British monarchy news. This was damage control unfolding behind locked doors. At the center of it all stood Queen Camilla. Publicly, she remained composed, fulfilling appearances with practiced grace. But privately, the atmosphere around her shifted dramatically. Invitations were delayed. Meetings quietly cancelled. Advisors who once lingered now kept their distance. The Queen Camilla scandal was no longer rumor. It was a presence, heavy and unavoidable, following her through every corridor of the palace. What few outside the inner circle understood was how long tensions had been building. The abdication did not emerge from a single moment of weakness or sudden illness. It was the result of months of quiet fractures, subtle power shifts, and growing mistrust. King Charles had not simply stepped aside. He had stepped away from something he no longer believed could be protected from within. Palace intrigue thrives on silence, and this situation was no exception. Documents were reviewed behind closed doors. Advisors were summoned discreetly. Legal teams worked late into the night, ensuring that every step taken was irreversible and legally sound. Nothing was left to chance. If the crown was changing hands, under such extraordinary circumstances, it had to be done with absolute precision. Within these private discussions, the word betrayal surfaced again and again. Royal family betrayal is not always loud or dramatic. Often, it is quiet, procedural, and devastating precisely because it hides behind loyalty and duty. What unsettled senior officials most was not just the abdication itself, but the implication that the monarchy had been compromised from within. Prince William found himself pulled deeper into the storm. This was no longer theoretical responsibility or distant preparation. The monarchy was accelerating toward him, whether he was ready or not. Advisors began addressing him differently, testing language, gauging reactions. The transition was happening in real time, and there was no space for hesitation. Catherine, Princess of Wales, became an anchor in those moments. While speculation swirled publicly, inside the palace, she focused on stability. Her calm presence reassured staff and signaled continuity. Yet behind that composure was resolve. She understood that the survival of the institution depended not just on tradition, but on restoring trust where it had been eroded. Outside the palace gates, the narrative took on a life of its own. Media outlets framed the story as spectacle, pitting loyalty against ambition, love against power. But insiders knew the truth was far more complex. This was not a simple scandal. It was the exposure of fault lines that had been ignored for too long. The royal conspiracy whispered about in private was now bleeding into public consciousness. As pressure mounted, alliances shifted. Those who once supported Camilla began to distance themselves, fearful of being associated with a collapsing position. Others doubled down, insisting that the abdication was a calculated move designed to protect Prince William's future reign. Every theory fed the fire, and every silence deepened suspicion. What became impossible to deny was this: the monarchy was undergoing a reckoning. The grandeur, the ceremony, the symbolism could no longer mask the reality that power, when mismanaged, invites consequence. Buckingham Palace drama was no longer confined to royal watchers. It had captured global attention because it exposed something universal. Even the most ancient institutions are vulnerable when trust is broken. And still, one question refused to fade. If King Charles' abdication was the opening move, what truth had forced his hand? The answers, buried beneath layers of protocol and discretion, were beginning to surface. And when they did, they would not only redefine Queen Camilla's role, but reshape the future of the British monarchy itself. Behind the guarded silence of Buckingham Palace, the real investigation began. This was not announced, not acknowledged, and certainly not documented in any official schedule. It unfolded quietly, carried by trusted hands and measured conversations, because exposure at the wrong moment could have collapsed everything. King Charles had already made his decision to step away, but the reasons behind it demanded clarity, not speculation. If the monarchy was to survive, the truth had to be undeniable. The first signs appeared in paperwork. routine medical summaries circulated. Among senior advisors, did not align with private briefings given directly to the king. The language differed. The severity fluctuated. Dates overlapped in ways that made no sense. At first, these inconsistencies were dismissed as clerical errors, but when similar contradictions surfaced again and again, doubt hardened into suspicion. This was no accident. Someone was shaping a narrative. Late-night meetings became the norm. Files were reviewed under restricted access. A small circle of aides worked in near isolation, aware that loyalty alone was no longer enough. Proof mattered. The palace had learned this lesson before, and it would not repeat old mistakes. What emerged was deeply unsettling. Two parallel versions of reality existed within the system, one presented publicly and another hidden beneath layers of protocol. As this unfolded, Queen Camilla's position grew increasingly precarious. Her influence, once subtle but effective, was now scrutinized from every angle. Communications she had authorized were traced. Meetings she had requested were re-examined. What initially appeared as concern for stability began to resemble strategic maneuvering. The Queen Camilla scandal was no longer defined by rumor, but by patterns that could not be ignored. Prince William became central to this phase, not as a passive heir, but as an active participant in protecting the monarchy he would soon inherit. The pressure on him intensified with each revelation. He understood that whatever happened next would define his reign before it even began. This was not about removing individuals. It was about restoring confidence in an institution that millions believed was being quietly manipulated. Catherine remained pivotal, not through visibility, but through precision. While public attention focused elsewhere, she examined correspondence, schedules, and overlooked details others dismissed. Her ability to connect small inconsistencies into larger truths became invaluable. This was palace intrigue at its most dangerous, where influence did not announce itself, but moved through implication and silence. As evidence mounted, the narrative shifted internally. What had once been framed as a health-driven abdication began to look like a strategic withdrawal designed to prevent deeper damage. King Charles was not retreating out of weakness. He was stepping aside to expose what could not be confronted, openly, while he remained on the throne. It was a calculated sacrifice, one that carried personal cost but institutional purpose. Outside the palace, speculation reached a fever pitch. Commentators debated power struggles and succession timelines, unaware of how close they were to the truth. The British monarchy news cycle fed on fragments, but the core remained concealed. This was not chaos, it was containment, and it was deliberate. When the final pieces fell into place, the conclusion was unavoidable. Trust had been breached at the highest level. Whether driven by ambition, fear, or belief in control, actions had crossed a line that could not be reversed. Royal family betrayal is not forgiven simply because it wears tradition or claims protection of the crown. It demands consequence. King Charles, already resolved, moved swiftly. Advisors were informed. Legal frameworks were activated. The transition toward Prince William's monarchy accelerated with quiet efficiency. There would be no dramatic confrontation behind closed doors, no emotional pleas. The evidence spoke clearly enough. By the time the world would learn fragments of the truth, the outcome was already sealed. The abdication was no longer just a personal decision. It was the final step in a controlled exposure of a royal conspiracy that threatened the integrity of the crown itself. And as the palace prepared for what came next, one thing became painfully clear. This crisis was never about stepping down. It was about stopping something far worse. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. Once the internal conclusions were reached, Buckingham Palace moved with the kind of efficiency only an institution hardened by centuries of crisis could manage. Appearances continued, ceremonies remained scheduled, and protocol held firm on the surface. But beneath that polished exterior, positions were being stripped of influence, access quietly revoked, and authority redefined in real time. The Buckingham Palace drama had entered its most dangerous phase, the moment when truth and power collide. Queen Camilla felt the shift before it was ever spoken aloud. Long-standing privileges subtly disappeared. Advisors who once sought her guidance now deferred elsewhere. Invitations arrived later, if at all. The palace did not accuse her publicly, but silence can be more devastating than confrontation. Every unanswered message, every closed door, confirmed what words had not yet declared. The Queen Camilla scandal was no longer a threat. It was a verdict, forming in slow motion. For Prince William, this period tested more than leadership. It tested restraint. He was urged to remain distant, to allow events to unfold without visible interference. Any sign of eagerness would be framed as ambition. Any silence would be read as complicity. He chose instead to project steadiness. In doing so, he reassured a nation that the monarchy was not unraveling but recalibrating. His future reign was already being shaped by crisis management rather than ceremony. Catherine, Princess of Wales, played a quieter but no less critical role. While speculation raged outside palace gates, she focused on continuity. Staff morale mattered. Stability mattered. The monarchy could not appear fractured at the moment it needed public confidence most. Her presence, calm and deliberate, became a counterweight to the chaos. In moments of uncertainty, symbols matter, and she embodied one the public instinctively trusted. The media, sensing blood in the water, intensified its scrutiny. Headlines grew sharper. Pundits spoke openly of royal family betrayal and internal power struggles, yet what they missed was how carefully the narrative was being managed from within. Nothing leaked without intention. Nothing escalated without purpose. The monarchy was not reacting. It was controlling the pace of revelation. As pressure built, legal frameworks quietly locked into place. Titles, roles, and privileges were reviewed under strict constitutional guidelines. There would be no impulsive decisions, no emotional outbursts. The crown does not act in anger, it acts in permanence. Every step taken was designed to withstand history's judgment, not just public opinion. Public sympathy began to shift. Where confusion once dominated, clarity slowly emerged. The abdication was no longer viewed solely as loss, but as sacrifice. King Charles' abdication started to be reframed as an act of preservation rather than surrender. In stepping aside, he had shielded the monarchy from deeper corrosion. That realization changed everything. The final preparations were made in near silence. The transition toward a new monarchy accelerated, not as a celebration, but as a necessity. Prince William's assumption of responsibility became inevitable, and with it, the closing of a chapter many had believed unshakable. The palace had chosen survival over sentiment. And still, one truth lingered beneath every development. This was not simply about who would wear the crown next. It was about accountability. The British monarchy had confronted a threat from within and chosen exposure over denial. In doing so, it crossed a line it could never uncross. Whatever came next would not be guided by comfort or tradition alone, but by a hard lesson learned in silence. The final chapter unfolded without ceremony, but its impact was unmistakable. When the palace confirmed the transition, there were no triumphant speeches or public celebrations behind the scenes. This was not a victory lap. It was a reckoning. King Charles' abdication was now fully understood as a line drawn in defense of the institution, not an act of retreat. The crown had chosen survival over sentiment, and that choice reshaped everything. Queen Camilla's departure from the center of power happened quietly. There was no dramatic exit, no public confrontation, no emotional farewell staged for cameras. Instead, access was reduced, authority dissolved, and influence erased through protocol. The Queen Camilla scandal did not end with a single announcement. It ended with absence. And in a monarchy built on presence, absence speaks louder than accusation. Prince William stepped closer to the throne. The tone of the palace shifted once again. Advisors no longer spoke in hypotheticals. Briefings were no longer framed as preparation. Responsibility had arrived early, and it arrived heavy. The Prince William monarchy was no longer a future concept. It was a present reality shaped by crisis, restraint, and consequence. Catherine, Princess of Wales, remained a stabilizing force throughout the transition. While others focused on power and position, she focused on trust. Public confidence had been shaken, and restoring it required consistency, not spectacle. Her role was not loud, but it was essential. In moments of institutional fracture, calm leadership becomes its own form of authority. Outside palace walls, public debate intensified. Some praised the monarchy for confronting betrayal head-on. Others questioned whether too much had been exposed. Was this transparency, or was it calculated damage control? Opinions fractured, but one fact remained undeniable. The British monarchy news cycle had shifted permanently. What once felt untouchable now felt accountable. Buckingham Palace drama had revealed something deeper than scandal. It exposed how fragile power becomes when trust erodes. The royal family betrayal at the heart of this crisis was not just personal, it was structural. It forced the institution to look inward and decide what it was willing to protect and what it was willing to sacrifice. As the dust settled, the palace returned to routine, but it was not the same routine as before. New safeguards were quietly implemented, oversight increased, influence was redistributed. The monarchy had learned at great cost that tradition alone is not armor against manipulation. Vigilance had become part of duty. For King Charles, life beyond the crown unfolded in quieter terms. Stripped of daily obligation, he carried the weight of a decision few could ever understand. History would debate his choice for decades. Some would call it courage. Others would call it betrayal of love. But the crown endured, and in the monarchy's world, endurance is the ultimate measure. This was never just a story of abdication. It was a story of power tested, loyalty fractured, and a system forced to evolve under pressure. Royal conspiracy, palace intrigue, and scandal may have drawn the world's attention, but accountability is what defined the outcome. As a new era begins, one truth remains. The monarchy survived not because it hid the truth, but because it confronted it. And in doing so, it sent a clear message. Even within the oldest institution in Britain, betrayal has consequences. Power demands restraint, and the crown will always choose itself over those who threaten its integrity. The story may feel complete, but its echoes are only beginning. History will decide how this moment is remembered, and the world will be watching every step that follows. If this story made you question everything you thought you knew about the British monarchy, you're not alone. Power, betrayal, and hidden truths are still unfolding behind palace walls. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this shocked you, share it with a fellow royal watcher, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.